This episode of Distraction is sponsored by my good friends at Omega Bright Wellness. I take Omega Bright's omega-3 and CBD supplements every day, and so does my wife. Shop online at omegabrightwellness.com. This episode is also sponsored by Landmark College. Landmark's summer programs are designed to help high school and college students find their learning strengths and differences. Learn more at landmark.edu/summer. Hello and welcome to Distraction. I'm your host, Dr. Ned Hallowell, and we have a truly unique show today. All of our shows are unique, but this one is particularly unique. Now, I know for you grammarians, something can't be particularly unique. It's either unique or it's not. Well, this is unique by any reckoning. You know, one of my cornerstone beliefs, principles, interests, avidities is the power of connection. Really, any connection to something larger than yourself. Not just a person, a dog. In fact, I dedicated my last book to dogs, to nature, to art, to an idea, to a cause, to a piece of music, whatever. It is in connection that we are at our best, and it is in disconnection that we are at our absolute worst. And, you know, if there is one answer to the question, what is the meaning of life, it is in the word connection. That's where we find our greatest joy, our greatest success, our deepest revelations, our most constant feelings of faith, of security, and of stability. And in disconnection, we suffer the opposite of all of those. So I'm always looking for new ways to connect, new ways to develop this really phenomenal state called connection, and particularly during the pandemic when we've had enforced disconnection. Not total, but it's been a whole lot more difficult. And I call connection the other vitamin C, vitamin connect. And we've all been suffering from a global vitamin connect deficiency. And believe me, the symptoms of it are dire. Low-grade depression, lethargy, you get sick more easily, immune system dysfunction, you just don't have your pizzazz, your get up and go, your joie de vivre, your special sauce. All of that disappears, and you kind of languish. You're not fully depressed, but you know you're not yourself. You're not your A game or even your B game. You're operating on your C game, and you're just from pillar to post. You're wondering, how long is this darn thing going to last? And so, you know, I am always looking for ways that people can connect. And thanks to our producer, Sarah, we discovered this genius who I'm going to introduce you to in a couple of moments, who also was suffering during the pandemic, feeling lonely. And I want to let her tell you her story, but it's phenomenal. And what she did, she truly made lemonade out of lemons. I mean, I just am so impressed by her ingenuity. And before it's over, I'm going to tell you, I'm sure she has ADHD. She probably doesn't know it, but I'll bet she does. Because what she did is so creative and so original. Well, with that introduction, I want to introduce you to my new friend, Heather Lee. And I wish you could see her because she's absolutely stunningly beautiful and just has the most charming glasses that are almost as big as her face. And I'm looking at her now through the computer screen. But Heather, welcome to Distraction.
Hi, it's so lovely to be here. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction.
So I'm sure our listeners are wondering, so what did she do? Here she was, lonely in the pandemic, and what innovative, unique avenue did you pursue to alleviate your feelings of loneliness?
Yeah, so in search of connection and being alone in quarantine in the middle of Manhattan, I created a blind matchmaking experiment through the exchange of voice memos. Um, the context was that I was single, recently laid off as a result of the quarantine. And I decided to use my newfound time to learn about interpersonal connection, how to get better at romantic connections. And I came up with this experiment. I found strangers who were single people also looking for an alternative way to connect with people romantically, had them sign up for my experiment. And the premise is that everything would be based on the exchange of voice memos. So no pictures, no names, no direct contact. It was based on an emotional connection first, getting to know someone through their voice. The power of voice has a lot that it can reveal about intimacy. And they would do this for 30 days, only one voice message a day for 30 days. And I would facilitate everything. I would kind of be the middleman, exchanging all the voice memos between people. There's a lot of intention I put into the process. I talked to a bunch of psychologists, academics, sociologists, and relationship coaches and matchmakers to kind of inform how I would set up this experiment. But yeah, all of it took over 30 days. At the end, I had about 100 hours of audio memos. I mean, people just really recorded a long time to their matches. And I was really just learning so much from listening on the back end.
So you said they could send their match one message a day.
Only one message a day. You didn't have to.
Was there any length, any time limit to the message?
No, there was no time limit.
So they could talk for an hour if they wanted to.
Yeah. I think the longest message was 46 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And then, just out of curiosity, how did you find these people? How did you find people who said, "Okay, I want to do a matchmaking service based only on voice memos"?
That's a great question. So in the beginning, I thought, okay, it's quarantine. It's at the beginning of April, peak quarantine. Everyone is lonely. For the single people who was already probably having a hard time with dating pre-pandemic. We already had a loneliness epidemic prior to COVID. I thought, oh, it'll be easy to find people. So I started with my network. I asked friends of friends, and asked them to share on their Instagram and send me people. And it was incredibly hard to find people in this way because the experience is so different. People want to see pictures first, or that's kind of the socialized behavior. And then I tried to post things on things like Craigslist and Nextdoor, and I reached out to a whole bunch of matchmakers and coaches to see if they could share some of their contacts and clients if they thought this was a meaningful experiment or a coaching opportunity for them. I posted on meetup boards, Reddit threads, lots of niche Facebook groups. So in the end, a combination of things. But I wanted to get 100 people because I knew that there was going to be a drop-off rate. Like, people would apply and create their audio profile, but eventually things come up and people might not continue, or I match them and they might not have a spark. But so I wanted to have enough people that I could get at least a few matches going.
And what criteria did you base your match on?
You mean how I match people?
Yeah.
Yeah, I tried all sorts of things. Initially I wanted to see if there's a scientific way. So I talked to a few psychologists and asked if there was some sort of a rubric, if you will, like what's the major predictor for compatibility. And really that's gender proximity. Other things, it's less significant, or it's very, very hard to prove.
Gender proximity means
So in terms of proximity, like how often you're exposed to someone, how often you see them, that's why when you look at longitudinal data, a lot of times the people are like their neighbor and they're to school together, or their coworker. Just by virtue of seeing someone over and over, you become attracted to them.
But these folks were only going to hear each other, correct?
Exactly. Yeah. So I couldn't really use any of those existing data points to guide me in how to match people. I tried to find an empath, and she said she could listen to the vibrations of people's voices, and she had a ranking system, and she could rank people's energy levels. But so I tried a few things, but in the end, I kind of just listened to what they said. The profile that they filled out are these 36 personal questions. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the psychology study from Professor Arthur Aaron from the 90s. There was a New York Times article written about it. It's called 36 Questions That Lead to Love.
Really?
Yeah.
Aaron's is the guy's name?
Professor Arthur Aaron.
Arin?
Aron is his last name. Yeah.
And he has 36 questions?
Yeah, so back a couple decades ago, he created this study that tested a few sets of questions to see which one could lead to a deeper connection between strangers. And this one set that had increasingly more personally revealing questions was the one that kind of proved it was the most effective in generating interpersonal connection. And then a writer for she submitted an article to the Modern Love column in the New York Times. This was a few years ago, and that kind of spread all over the internet. I think it's one of the New York Times top most read articles.
So is there now a dating site based on those 36 questions?
A lot of therapists and coaches do use that. Yeah, it's cool. You know, it starts off like, if you could choose one person living or dead as a dinner date, who would you choose? And then there's questions in the middle, like, when was the last time you cried? Tell me about your relationship with your mother. And it just gets increasingly more and more personal. And then the last question is, share a problem that you're dealing with and ask your partner for advice.
Yeah, I just found it, Arthur Aaron's 36 questions. Yeah. And so you used those
as
to help
the profile.
You create the matches. Okay.
So yeah, I asked them to submit their audio answers to all the 36 questions, and I listened to them and just kind of listened for interest, and I knew what geography they were in and their age. So I kind of just matched based on people that I very unscientifically thought would get along.
Hi, this is Sarah Gurton, producer here at Distraction. Last summer, Dr. Hallowell spoke with a mom named Marla, who had tried dozens of therapies for her 17-year-old autistic son and didn't see much improvement until she had him try the omega-3 and CBD supplements from Omega Bright Wellness. Here's part of their conversation.
So now you've got the team, and you're using nutrition, the dog, your daughter, connection, Vitamin Connect. Is that when you found out about supplements?
Yes, I had the wonderful opportunity to meet Dr. Carol Locke when I was at my church doing a woman's night. And so she asked me to have my son start taking the full broad spectrum, which is a CBD, and to put him on Omega Brights, like it's kind of like a fish oil, right? And so we put my son on it. And let me tell you, as God is my witness, it is a day and night transformation. We had a child who was not looking to pass any of his classes this year. He just finished and closed the school year off last Friday. And for the first time, the joy in that child, like he was expressing himself. He has taken up writing.
Wow.
He went from having all like F's in 4 of his 6 classes to finishing the year with 2 A's, 2 B's, and 2 C's. And that's with emergency distance learning as well. So that's a big transition for anybody who's on the spectrum. But
Right.
he took it in great strides. And it's night and day. And it's amazing because I've had people saying, oh, well, what medication did you put him on? Or what did you do? The teachers are asking. And I said, I did nothing but have him take Omega Bright. And I had him take a full broad spectrum of just 1 pill in the morning and then 1 in the evening of the CBD, the full broad spectrum. And that has changed my son's life.
That's
He's
just
in the community.
so wonderful.
Yeah, isn't that beautiful?
To learn more about Omega Bright's omega-3 and CBD supplements, go to omegabrightwellness.com. You'll save 20% on your first order with the promo code DISTRACTION. And this week in our Q&A episode, sponsored by the Foreman School in Litchfield, Connecticut, Ned responds to a mom named Mary who asks about how to help her young daughter manage her emotions and have fewer overwhelming feelings. Ned shares several ways Mary can help her daughter, including one that involves a giant beanbag. That's in this week's Q&A episode. We hope you check it out. All right, now let's get back to the show.
So what happened? Tell me what happened. You had 30 days of exchanging messages. What happened?
I was shocked, just by the amount of things that people shared. Of course, there are matches that didn't work out, but the ones that did, there were a few pairs that do talk every single day for 30 days. And these are the ones with 45-minute messages back and forth. And after the experiment ended, I created the podcast. Each episode kind of talks about one of the pairs and what I learn. But in listening,
you mean one of the pairs in your study?
In the podcast, I talk specifically about 3 pairs. Okay. And all 3 of these pairs, they did talk every day or exchange messages every day.
And why do you say pair instead of couple?
I guess because it's they might not be still together right now.
I see.
Yeah.
I see, yeah.
But in terms of what I learned, it was just a lot of self-reflection, listening to them. And I kind of was shocked by the way that people communicate. So rarely do we have the privilege of eavesdropping into other people's conversations and see how they flirt with other people, how they get to know someone, how they express affection and share vulnerability. So being able to just listen to that as a fly on the wall. And they knew that obviously I was listening since everything had to go through me.
So you were the eavesdropper.
I was the eavesdropper, yeah.
Yeah. Did you feel like a voyeur, or did you...
Yeah, certainly a little bit. Part of that is kind of the appeal. It's like, oh, I know these are private conversations. Should I really be listening? But but I also, from a technical perspective, I did have to listen to make sure that they didn't accidentally say their names. And a lot of times, their names might jump in there on accident. So I have to edit it out to maintain the premise of anonymity. Well,
Heather or Eves, let me just tell you, people love to be paid attention to.
Right.
And that's what you were doing. You were paying attention to them very closely. So I'm not surprised you didn't get much pushback.
Yeah.
They knew your eavesdropping was constructive and with an eye toward being helpful.
Yeah, I hope so. Well, it's also interesting that some of the messages, they're just like, oh, I kind of forget that there's another person listening. Sometimes it just sounds like self-recordings. They go on for 40 minutes. It just starts to sound like you're talking to yourself, even though it's directed at another person. And then, they're like, oh, I forget that there's always someone else listening. And they knew that I would use the recordings to create a podcast later. And they're like, oh, I forget that this eventually would be turned into a podcast, which is great.
Many of you have heard me talk about my love for Landmark College in beautiful Putney, Vermont. Not only because they gave me an honorary degree do I love Landmark College, I love them even before they did that, because they're the best when it comes to helping college-age students who have learning differences master their weaknesses and develop their strengths. They understand that having conditions like ADHD or dyslexia is a marker of talent, and they take it upon themselves to find the talent while also helping kids shore up on the things that are getting in their way. Landmark summer programs are particularly helpful if you don't want to go for the full college 4-year experience. And their summer programs are designed to help students find their learning strengths and differences. They're for high school students, graduating high school seniors, and for students enrolled in colleges elsewhere. There's also an online option for high school juniors and seniors, and students will learn specific strategies to help them learn in an academic environment. You can register for Landmark summer programs today. Go to landmark.edu/summer or click the link in our show notes. Have you learned, how much can you tell now just from a person's voice, from the sound of a person's voice? What can you tell about that person? Intuit or imagine about that person?
Yeah, one insight that I learned is just biologically, we are less equipped to fake our voices. Generally, we have more experience with changing our body language and facial expression to project an emotion that we don't actually feel, or maybe we want to exemplify exaggerate certain features to show that we are confident, even though we might be very anxious inside.
Right.
But with only voice, in an environment where you're devoid of any visual distractions and you're just focused on voice, it's much harder for our biology to control just the voice. So that's why podcasts are so inviting and engaging.
Yeah, I mean, what can you tell about me from my voice?
It's hard because we're also looking at each other on Zoom, right? But I've listened to a couple of your episodes prior to this, and I can definitely sense that you're someone who's curious and very authentically interested in your subjects and people that you're interviewing.
I wonder if our voice is there like a fingerprint? I'm sure the people who specialize in sound have studied this very carefully. Is there a unique signature to our voice or not?
Yeah, that I'm actually not sure, but I wouldn't be surprised if that existed. Yeah, there's the voice analytics technology these days is just phenomenal. There's thousands of attributes associated with our voice. And through this project, I partnered with a company called Behavioral Signals. They detect emotion through advanced AI technology and machine learning. And they are gathering thousands of voice features like your tenor, your pitch, your tone. And they amass all of that and kind of detect emotion based on what you're saying.
And the sound of a person's voice really does have an impact. I think in radio, it's everything. Your pipes, I think it's called. He's got a good set of pipes, or she's got a good. And then for therapists, I mean, I think it's a real disadvantage as a therapist if you don't have a soothing or reassuring voice. It's.
Yeah, it's definitely a immensely powerful tool in terms of connection.
Yeah. What takeaway points? I mean, you've started your podcast. It's nice to hear you. So, I guess one of your takeaway points is that we need to get better at listening.
Yeah, for sure. Just the power of listening can teach us so much. I learn a lot about what compatibility means, about self-reflection, projection, acceptance and understanding, what vulnerability means, just in listening to each of these pairs. The most recent episode that I'm currently working on, it's a lesson on vulnerability. What does that really mean to be vulnerable with someone? There's a difference between being vulnerable and being open. Vulnerability requires you to feel threatened in sharing something. If I feel anxious about sharing something with you and I don't know what additional reactions or judgments this share might elicit from you, that is vulnerability. Whereas openness, it might be super personal, intimate things, but I don't have that fear. It's not vulnerability.
So if I were to share something with you that I imagined you could think less of me because of, that would be vulnerability?
Yeah, potentially if you felt potentially shamed by it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing is vulnerability is idiosyncratic. What is vulnerable to you may not be vulnerable to me.
So true.
Yeah.
How have you found that people deal with vulnerability when they feel it?
Well, between my participants, when it happens, it builds more trust. And I'm not a scientist, I'm not a psychologist, but I can even hear them opening up after they share vulnerable things and exchange. It's reciprocal. It creates more intimacy when one person shares something vulnerable and the other person reciprocates it. It's not just one way, And once that reciprocity happens, it builds trust and intimacy, and then you feel closer to that person, and you're going to want to share more. So just in that flow and just the ongoing conversations, I can hear it. And Behavioral Signals, the company that partnered with me to ingest and analyze all of the voice data, in these pairs, they also found that mirroring took place in terms of pace. When we become closer and more connected to someone, our speech patterns could evolve towards the other person. So they observed for some pairs that, their speaking rates actually did change to mirror each other, which is kind of interesting since this is not real time talking, and it's also not that long. It's a month, 30 days, but that still happens.
It makes me think of women sharing the same house for a while. They end up having the same menstrual cycle.
Yeah.
There are ways that we tune into one another that we don't do on purpose, but that's very biological.
Totally. Yeah.
It's But I think the thing with vulnerability, almost everyone has an episode where they trusted someone and the person betrayed them. The person took advantage of the trust, took advantage of the confidence, and made fun of them for it. So I wonder if you encountered that with your pairs, where they were guarded, where they didn't want to be vulnerable.
Yeah, there were definitely pairs, not the ones that were featured in the episode, in the podcast, but there are definitely pairs that were not comfortable sharing certain things. And, maybe this isn't the right medium, but those conversations didn't continue very far. For something like this, it's kind of a self-selecting thing, too, for you to be interested in a medium and a way to connect with other people in this way. You kind of do need to be open to sharing your voice. And it's only 30 days, so you kind of need to be open sooner than later because the other person will lose interest.
Did they all meet each other in person after the 30 days?
For the 3 pairs that I do talk about on the podcast, they do.
But the others.
I'm not sure about the others because since they weren't really subjects of the podcast, I didn't debrief with them.
Okay. And again, the name of your podcast is It's Nice to Hear You?
It's nice to hear you.
And you talked to these 3 pairs?
Yeah, so in the process of creating the podcast, I also did the debrief with them after the 30 days. So once the experiment was over, I reached out and to see what happened, how they've kind of stayed connected or not with their matches. It was somewhat of a challenging decision for me to do that because one of the things I wanted the podcast to focus on is the moment, like that point in time in which this experiment happened. So much of romance and dating stories are so focused on a linear path. Like if it's not a happy ending, then it's not a good story, or if they didn't end up together, that might have been a waste of time. I'm exaggerating, but
that's the most rom-coms end happy.
Yeah, so there's that one narrative for romance stories, and I didn't want this podcast to be a romance story.
Right.
To me, it doesn't matter what happens in the end. What is meaningful is that these people connected during this very strange year in a very strange medium.
Right.
And they open up to each other over 30 days. And they did have a connection. So regardless if there was a long-term successful relationship after or not, it doesn't devalue this experience in any way. I personally just learned so much from listening to them, and I kind of didn't want to know what happened afterwards with them because I was afraid that would taint my memory and my judgment of the experience.
And it is a kind of Rorschach test if you just listen to someone's voice and imagine what that person is like. What do you hear in the voice? What do you imagine that person's life is like? Just from his or her voice.
Yeah, imagination is one of the most powerful tools in romantic connections. And that's one of the reasons why I restricted the voice messages to only 1 a day.
Yeah.
Because in the research that I read, you have to have the space and time to imagine the other person. If everything was so accessible, like you have all of their pictures and all of the profiles and you can talk to them anytime, it removes that imagination. But if you just give people a little bit, and then your brain will kind of do the work of imagining what they're like, and you become more curious and intrigued. So by placing restrictions on what you can see, and throughout the experiment, I had prompts that shared a little bit more about the other person. For example, one prompt is like, share a picture of an outfit that you would wear on your first date with your match. That happened somewhere in the middle of the experiment, and just by seeing the picture of that person's outfit, you don't get to see who they are, but it's a little glimpse more. So you're earning more access as you go along versus getting all of the access up front. So yeah, imagination is super, super powerful.
Yes, it sure is. I mean, we could talk for a long time. You're a wonderfully engaging person, and thank you so much for coming on. Now, if people want to learn more about you, they go to, do you have a website or what?
Yeah, there's more content on the website. It's nicetohearyou.com. Have additional content from the experiment besides what's being shared on the podcast, and follow us on Instagram at It's Nice to Hear You.
And you like to be called Heather Lee or Eve Roper?
Yeah, Heather is my real name.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Heather Lee Eavesroper and it's nice to hear you.com. You've really opened up a new way of learning about a person just by listening to the sound of his or her voice. Really creative on your part. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for taking the time. And I might have to get checked out if I do have ADHD. It hasn't crossed my mind before, but now that you've mentioned it.
Well, I'd have a high index of suspicion. I'm not saying for 100% sure, but you seem to me as if you very well might have, as I say, the gift. I don't treat disabilities. I help people unwrap their gifts. And
I love that. I love what you said in a previous episode about how it's a trait and it's
Exactly.
a superpower if you can manage it.
Can be a superpower indeed, absolutely. Okay, well, that's our show for today. You can find It's Nice to Hear You wherever you listen to podcasts or go to itsnicetohearyou.com. Please reach out to us with your questions and comments, write an email or record a voice memo, and send it to us at connect@distractionpodcast.com. Distraction is created by Sounds Great Media. The podcast was recorded and produced by the divine Sarah Gurton and hosted by me, the not quite so divine Dr. Ned Hallowell. And thanks to our guest Heather Lee and to all of you for listening. The episode you just heard was sponsored by Omega Bright Wellness, creators of the #1 omega-3 supplement for the past 20 years. Omega Bright supplements are safe, third-party tested, and I take them every day. Shop online at omegabrightwellness.com.